This is a presentation of Stakeholder Matrix. The Stakeholder Matrix is a tool that helps us categorize the stakeholders by their level of interest and influence in the project. We're going to use a simple matrix where we use the level of influence and the level of interest. The idea behind it is that when you look at your stakeholders in your project, it could be a very large number of people and groups. And trying to have an understanding of each one of them and trying to see how they can support the project could be a daunting work because there are so many of them and everybody might have a different need, a different level of interest on the project. So the idea behind that is that we break them into 4 groups. Again, we identify the level of influence they have, high or low influence, the power they have to change the project, and their level of interest in the project from low to high, and you end up with these 4 groups of stakeholders. The first group, category A, is the group with high influence. They have a lot of power in the project, but also high interest. Typical members in this group include the donor, and the strategy for them is to manage them closely, keep them committed, meet their expectations, and involve them in the project. So these are people who are kind of the sponsors of the project. They have the power, either access to resources, but they are very interested in the project, so they are supportive. So it is a project group that the project manager needs to work with them closely to make sure that they're using those resources, and they're also taking advantage of that high interest they have in the project. The second group, or category B, is the group with high influence but low interest. The strategy for that group is to keep them satisfied, meaning that you work closely to increase their interest and satisfy their needs. That means that it could be a group that they have low interest because they might have other priorities, or they don't have enough information about the project, or they have the wrong information about the project. So you need to engage them and satisfy whatever needs they have in terms of helping them understand the project so that you improve their commitment and you improve the level of interest they have. The goal for the project manager in this group is to get this group from low, at least, to try to get it into high interest. Why? Because of the level of influence and power they have. You don't want this group to have a negative interest because of the power they have. The third group is the group with low influence but high interest. Low influence, they don't have much power on the project, but they are very interested. They are supportive of the project. The strategy is to keep them informed. You maintain communications, you send the information to the project to maintain the level of interest. This group sometimes could, typical members of this group could be the beneficiaries. They don't have major power on the project as individuals, but they are very interested in the results of the project. The last group is the category D. These are the stakeholders that have low influence, low power, and low interest in the project. The idea is that we don't do much work with them, we just keep them under observation, but we do monitor for changes in interest and influence. The idea is that we might not need to spend a lot of resources to change their interest because they don't have much power or influence, but it could be that by the nature of the groups, sometimes the influence changes. So we use this simple matrix where we identify the stakeholders. We list all the stakeholders in the project. Then for each one of those, we have a ranking of the level of influence from high, medium, low. The type of influence. We also rank them by the level of interest in the project and the type of interest. Based on that information, depending on the results that we have, then we are able to place them on the corresponding group. And we do that for every stakeholder that we identify in the team. And this is an exercise that happens at the beginning of the project when the team and some subject matter experts or project managers from previous projects that have an understanding of the stakeholders in a meeting, they develop this matrix and helps organize that information. But this information is helps the project manager to have a baseline of where the stakeholders are. So then you can map them in the matrix depending on the groups that you have and based on the level of influence and the level of interest. And that's an ideal way to help you understand where the stakeholders are located. Because once you have an idea, then it's easier to work on those strategies for those people. Don't spend too much time and effort on this other group of people. And even when you're working with some key stakeholders with high levels of influence, see how you can then help them move by increasing the level of interest in the project. And it's important that you monitor as the project makes progress, because a lot of these stakeholders, our initial assumptions of where they are can change. You can have a group that at the beginning showed low influence and medium interest, but it can change, it can move by whatever conditions happen in the project or by the conditions in that group. They can then increase the level of influence or interest in the project, and they belong now to a different area where you need to change your strategy with that group. Here are some basic rules for successfully working with the stakeholders. Number one is always identify your stakeholders and understand their interest. Prioritize your stakeholders by the levels of influence and interest. Invest the time to understand their needs. Develop a communication engagement strategy and work the plan. And 5, you monitor for changes over time as the stakeholders shift their levels of interest and influence. Thank you very much. It has been the end of the presentation on the Stakeholder Matrix.